Welcome back, Warrior Next Door listeners. Welcome to the fourth installment of the John Little series. The infantryman who we just had a chance to interview recently, who's still with us, over 100 years old, who fought up the boot of the Italian peninsula. And in this installment, you're going to hear about the breakout from Rome and the push up the boot. And this would be no less vicious than any of the fighting that they experienced before. So sit back and listen in. It was the 34th Division. Did you guys break out from Anzio and head up to Florence? Is that what happened?
We broke out of Anzio and went to Rome.
What was that like?
Rome.
What was that like?
We supposed to have captured Rome. The 34th was the day that they landed at Normandy.
Yeah.
When we went into Rome, we captured Rome. They told half of the company or unit get under the bridge that went over the Tiber on one end, the other half get underneath. So on the way down there, walking where we need to be to get under the bridge, I wound up under it, which I thought was better. The next morning, everybody was wondering what they was going to do to see Rome, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll be. Just at daylight, they said, we're moving out.
Oh.
And I didn't get to go back to Rome until 1984.
Oh. So you guys were there to kind of secure the perimeter, and then they turned you around and put you back in the front lines.
Right, yeah.
So this is the single most controversial thing Mark Clark did during the entire war. And Mark Clark did a bunch of very controversial things. I'll read it from Donald Miller's book. In taking Rome, Mark Clark might have prolonged the Italian campaign. The main objective was the German army. That was written in Operation Diadem by Alexander. But Clark had ignored Alexander's order to strike to the northeast from the Alban Hills to cut off Kesselring's line of retreat. Instead, he had sent a token force after the Germans and then ordered his main columns to head north for Rome, a decision that allowed the Germans to slip away and fight again. And they would at the Gothic Line. It continues. Clark wanted his Fifth Army, not the British, to have the honor of liberating Rome, the first Axis capital fall. It had taken 5 months to move the short distance from Cassino to Rome via Anzio, and it cost over 100,000 broken or buried men. What had been gained? Valuable airfields at Foggia from which to strike at Romania and the Reich. This and the tying down of the German divisions that would have been used elsewhere. Some asked, was it worth it? So basically, Clark disobeyed an order from a superior officer as the troops were retreating, the German troops from the line and heading north up the boot to Italy. Instead of cutting off that retreat, encircling them, creating a cauldron, and eliminating that entire 10th German army, he went into Rome, and the Germans went to the east of him and went right up into the Gothic Line. And the divisions that fought these battles would have to work their way up the boot of Italy, through Tuscany, through Florence, through Bologna, through the Po Valley for another year because of his insubordination.
So he knew that by taking Rome first and not trying to go around it and encircle the German, I think was the 10th Army, is that you said?
Yep.
That would be the consequence? Did he know that, or did that just how it happened, how it just ended up happening?
So his orders were, when you break out of Anzio and when we break out of the Cassino, the Gustav line, is for the Anzio troops, which were pretty much all Fifth Army, to act as a block to stop the Germans from retreating north up the boot, to encircle them with the troops from the Gustav line following on their heels, to create a trap, a pincer. Mm-hmm. One arm of the pincer to the north was the Anzio troop. The other were the troops from the Gustav line, from Monte Cassino.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, that pincer to the north, instead of it encircling the Germans and preventing the army to leave, he put a token force there just to say he did it, kind of like a patent thing. And then he took the vast majority of his troops to have a big parade in Rome, to be the person, the photo of the liberation of Rome, to have it be an American.
Okay. Hmm.
It's the most controversial thing he did. There are some authors, some of whom are British, who defend Mark Clark and said, look, there were German troops in Rome. Could you really be that northern pincer and surround the army knowing that your left flank would have had all those troops in Rome just sitting there? Wouldn't you need to eliminate those first? But I
Right.
think the vast preponderance of what I read has been pretty harsh on Mark Clark as not being particularly a good decision at all. And because of that, in these last several clips, and he doesn't, John doesn't talk about it as much. There's not as much to read about. It's like what happened when Rome fell was literally the next. So Rome fell on June 5th. What happened on June 6th, 1944?
Yeah.
D-Day.
D-Day. That took all the sucked all the air out of the room, didn't it?
So what you end up having is all the press, all the media machine, they leave. They go to Normandy. That's it. Italy's forgotten. They're gone. And in fact, while the Germans are reinforcing Italy because of this breakout from the Gustav Line with 10 divisions, Eisenhower removes 7 divisions from Italy for Operation Dragoon Anvil.
Dragoon. Yeah.
And yeah,
Uh-huh.
to invade southern France, which was really successful. It was the right thing to do. So now it becomes a sideshow. And what that means, Ryan, is there's a lot of dying going on by John and his men as they work their way up Tuscany, into Florence, into Bologna. But when I read books or try to watch YouTube videos and stuff on it, there's almost nothing there. It's almost like here's how the war is covered. We went to North Africa was one. We went to Sicily and won. We went to the boot of Europe. We got our butts handed to us. We finally broke out of the Gustav Line, went into Rome, and then D-Day happened and the war ended. You almost never find anything about what the troops had to do as they slogged their way up the northern half of this reinforced peninsula.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what these next clips are, is him working his way up. They're going to go from Rome north, basically up into Florence, where the Apennines, which have been working their way kind of right in the center of Italy as you go north, they curl to the west. And that's where the Gothic Line is. And the only thing behind the Gothic Line is the Po Valley and then the Italian Alps, and then the war is over.
Can I say one thing before we start the next clip? Think about the pressure the German military and the German high command was feeling at this point. You've got the Allies landing on June 6th.
Yep.
You've got the Allies coming up through Italy. You've got the Allies landing in southern France.
Yep.
And you've got the Russians coming at you from the east.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, the pressure in this pressure cooker is going up by the minute. And how do you sustain that? I mean, I'm amazed, honestly. I'm amazed at how long the Germans were able to sustain that for as long as they did.
Yep. They were extremely efficient. In Italy, it was perfect ground for defensive warfare. You had a brilliant Albert Kesselring. I couldn't agree with you more, Ryan.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right. All right. On to the next clip then.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, next little town we went to was I forgot the name right offhand, but we went straight off of Rome north, and there was a lot of well, to tell you the truth, when you got to Italy, everywhere you looked, there was history. I said that before, I guess, since I've been talking to y'all, but there was, everywhere you looked, was nothing but history. All the Vatican. I do remember the Pope giving me a little cross, and I still got it.
The Pope.
Yeah.
Got my little Bible, combat Bible. Still got it.
The one furthest north, was that the Gothic Line? Was that the last main line of resistance you guys faced?
Yes, yes. And
What do you
when we got down, when the first armored got down into the Po Valley, you know, it was flat and it was big farms because I remembered truthfully that we went into this house and this man kept saying mangiare, that's something to eat. They knew the Americans was coming and they had cooked a big meal for them because they had plenty of food down in the Po Valley. I mean, there was food everywhere and they were willing to share it. But we were not allowed or didn't take any of their food unless we gave them something back for it. We had canned rations, you know. We call them sea rations. I don't know what, they probably don't even use that word anymore. But it's all artificial now, I guess. The food they have now, I don't know.
Did you what do you remember about the push on the Gothic Line? And then you already mentioned some of the things you experienced in the end of the war. What did you remember about that part of Italy and the fighting that took place up north?
Well, the further you went north from Naples, the fighting was real bad. But as far as you went inland towards Rome, it was easier. You know, it broke through the Gothic line, and they finally got those tanks on the other side of Bologna. They got those tanks in there. Well, see, that was a big thing. You get those tanks in there. Of course,
Yeah,
the
because
German tanks was a lot better than the Americans at that time. German was a lot better tank. They came out with this Tiger tank, and then they came out with the Super Tiger, I believe they called it.
Yep.
But it failed them because it was so big. They said it was sinking in the ground too deep. It wouldn't move as fast as they really thought it should move. The Super Tiger. Oh, it was almost twice the weight of the other tanks.
Did you see any of our tanks taken out by the Germans?
Oh yeah, they would. They had one tank destroyer. The Americans did. That was real good. But those Sherman tanks, they didn't stand up too well against the German tanks.
They called them Ronsons, didn't they?
Yeah. Here's another veteran like maligning my beautiful Sherman tank. It must mean they sucked.
Now he's talking about Super Tiger. He means the King Tiger.
I think so. I mean,
okay.
So the reason that I wanted to stop it here and talk for a little bit is, first off, the Gothic Line is where, like I said, the Apennines, instead of running north-south along Italy, roughly, they go east-west right there to the ocean. And you had to cross those mountains, that barrier. And then beyond that, in Bologna and other areas like Milan, is this beautiful Po Valley, right? These river valleys. And then you've got the Alps. So breaking across into the Gothic Line, into the Po Valley, this is the first time I heard him talk about tanks, right? It's really the first time. Tuscany would have been able to use tanks. He talked about the first armored division coming to shore on Anzio. But once they got to the Gothic Line, they would have been worthless. But now they're on the other side of it. They got the first ID with them, and they're shucking and jiving. The Germans are just to the north, right? You got Switzerland to the north, and then Austria, which they occupied, to the northeast, and then Yugoslavia, which they're in to the far east. So they're pushing them out, but the Germans can bring in these big tanks. They don't need to worry about when they were further down the boot how to do that. And something else before I forget. Napoleon was famous for saying that if you want to conquer Italy, and he would know because he did it three or four times, you come in from the north and move to the south. Because the north is where the main bases were, where the people were, where the resources were. As you made your way down south, it got more rural, except for Rome. And the Allies, of course, did it exactly the opposite. Well, now they're up in the north, and now they're starting to roll. But the other thing that I read from the scant stuff that's written about the push across the Gothic line is some of the casualties that, like the 133rd Regiment of the 34th Infantry Division, some of the worst casualties they incurred in the entire war was in Tuscany to the south of the Gothic line. Tuscany has all these hilltop towns, and the Germans had great defensive positions, and the 34th was bled white crossing those.
Mm-hmm.
So by July, they had to stop and rest and recuperate before they could make the push on the Gothic line. I think it's sad that after the fall of Rome, it was difficult for me to find things to read about the Gothic line and then what happened when we got into northern Italy. There's just not much there.
Well, it's ripe for research, it sounds like. You know?
Ooh, wow, look at that, Mr. Silver Lining. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. But, and
Yeah.
it would, to reinforce how tough it got, Ryan, play this next clip from a question that you asked about his experiences there.
It was up in northern Italy, and they had we call them arrow bursts. They would throw those shells in there, and if they didn't hit you, they would had a fuse on there that they would set that fuse, and they would go off in the air above your hole, and that's what got phosphorus.
Oh,
What do you do with a phosphorus wound? How did you handle that?
Like everybody else, I don't know what they got.
But I mean, I don't think we've ever interviewed somebody who got injured with phosphorus. That's a burning piece of metal.
Yes, it's they shoot it. I don't know. They could make them go off anywhere they wanted to.
Yeah.
And you could tell, we call them arrow bursts.
Yep.
And they'd spread off everywhere.
so I understand that it wounded your right hand. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was my left hand.
It was your left hand. Okay.
Left hand.
Did my understanding of white phosphorus is that when it gets on your skin, it just keeps burning and keeps burning.
Yeah, I was in the hospital 17 days.
How do they stop it? How do they, like, how far down if I could ask you, how far down did the wound burn?
Well, I don't know. I know it was wrapped up, and I know I immediately almost started getting feeling better because they told me I had to go back to the front line.
So did it hit the top of your hand or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it just sprayed down on them.
My goodness.
And 17 days, I do remember that.
Hmm.
Because I remember the general that sent us back, the medic, he was a general. And when he told us we could go back to our unit, he didn't say go back to the front line. He said, you go back to your own unit, meaning they couldn't put you in a different outfit. You was going back where you came from.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a good thing because you knew everybody, or most of them.
Yeah. We've heard that several times where sometimes these men, when they got out of the hospital, they just use them as replacements again and just stuff them somewhere. And that was terrible. We've talked several times on this podcast about the replacement system in World War II on the American side, how terrible it was. But in this case, they're like, no, you go back to Company C, which was a big deal. It's like going back to his family. Look, dude, I still don't understand how you treat a phosphorus wound. I haven't done any research on this.
I have.
Oh, tell me. I mean, it's like, to me, it sounds really bad.
So I'm looking at an abstract. Now this is, a modern day treatment of how they would treat white phosphorus wounds. It's a, it's a chemical, wound that happens. It's chemical. It gets on your skin. But this is from a Science Direct paper, and it's called The Management of White Phosphorus Burns. And it says that they're rarely encountered, typically during battle, or maybe industrial accidents, so on, maybe even fireworks. It says here that the treatment protocol comprises of 1% copper sulfate solution to neutralize the phosphorus. And and to be able to identify the phosphorus particles, then you do a big, like normal saline irrigation of the wound. And you got to keep the wounds moist with the saline solution soaked pads over the wounds. Debridement of the area, which means clearing off the necrotic skin, things like that, and rinsing it. And then they do skin grafts after that. But the main point is to use the copper sulfate solution to neutralize the phosphorus so it doesn't keep burning and keep digging down.
And so maybe
I wonder if they knew that.
When he said, I just know that when they put the bandage on my arm, the pain went away.
It must have been a solution like that. Yes.
Because he was so nonchalant about it. I mean,
what I know, they talk about it being an extremely painful wound to
like
have.
A burn that doesn't stop. It can go all the way through.
Well, that's why I was wondering. I'm like, I was half expecting him to say, "Oh, it burned all the way through my hand," like,
and then the pain stopped, right? Because
see my hole in my hand. I got a hole right here,
right? Like some alien movie, right? With the acid stuff. I mean, he was just like, "Oh yeah, I got burned 17 days." The important part, though, is I got back to my men, which is so World War II veteran, right?
I mean, that's what's so heartening when you listen to these guys. I mean, yeah, I got wounded. Yeah, it was white phosphorus, but I got back to my men. I was only there for 17 days and I was back there in the thick of it. You're like, golly, dude.
Wow. And I'm reading we got a write up here from Dale on John. The wound occurred in October 44 at Futa Pass, Futa. That is the pass that's north of Florence that the Allies, there were several breaches in the Gothic line. This was one of them that went all the way across the Apennines into Bologna and then into the Po Valley, which would go all the way to the Alps. So that's what they were doing when he got hit with white phosphorus. Ooh, okay. Let's go to the next clip, homie.
All right, man.
But I do remember when the war was over, we were in this little town, and the Germans started to come in toward us in a truck. And of course, the lieutenant put us all in a safe place. And of course, they fired on that truck, and the Germans jumped out. And about an hour after that, this Jeep or German vehicle came down the road with a big old white flag on it, waving the white flag. And he could speak perfectly English, better than we could. He wanted to know the highest ranking officer that we had there, and we told him it was a second lieutenant. And he said, well, is that so? And our second lieutenant said, yes, I'm here with this company. And he said, well, we want to surrender. And he said, well, if I go back there with you now, I better come back unharmed. And they started coming from everywhere, the Germans did. And I remember Sherman, he came down there, he was riding a big old white horse. And I said to myself, that's not a German. They wouldn't let somebody out of shape like that be a German officer for sure.
Yeah.
He was real fat and small. And of course he was. And of course they started to surrender by the battle. a whole division surrendered to us right there.
Wow.
And then come to find out the war was over.
Oh, wow. But there was more to it than that, Ryan. And I actually didn't get a chance to read closely the write up. You did. So go ahead and play the next clip because it wasn't like people just surrendered. He was
No, it wasn't that easy.
no, he was pretty he would end up getting decorated for this. So go ahead and play the next clip.
Looking at the write up that Dale did, he says that this is what he wrote about you. As the war was coming to an end, John, as one of a 6-member advance party entering Reggio Emilia, was questioning Italians about Germans in the area. Advised that they had been gone for 3 or 4 days, he and Sergeant Hershey looked alongside the building to find a German truck mounted with a field kitchen, and the food was still hot. They had hundreds of Germans backed up with nowhere to go. The fight lasted all night with portions of the German 90th Light Infantry, 148th Infantry, and the 232nd Infantry Divisions surrendering to the 34th Infantry Division the next day. So that's what you were talking about, huh?
Yes. Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
So they fought the whole night against you guys. So it wasn't
They sure did.
it wasn't as if they just came out and said, we give up. They fought. Then they realized, okay, what are we doing?
I think they could realize that the Americans, when we pushed them back again the Po River, they had nowhere to go because it knocked the bridges down.
Mm-hmm.
They had nowhere to go. They parachuted British paratroopers, but they had a special name, but I don't remember. The British did. And they had talked to the Germans. These paratroopers had. And I guess they just realized that we quit bombing them for a reason. Because you actually was taking advantage of someone helpless by keeping shelling them or bombing them. So we quit bombing them, and we all of that took place at Bologna, Italy. Bologna.
In the Po Valley. So I would have totally missed that. I mean, he was telling us earlier in the interview, yeah, that he remembers the German surrender and how they came across, but he would get decorated for valor for stumbling across a German unit who had just left for cover after their food was not eaten yet, and the 34th engaged in a firefight with them all night until
that's the thing that's kind of odd to me.
Yeah.
Is that the war is supposedly over unless it happened that very night that the war was over. Is that what he was saying?
Yep, May 2nd.
So they came into the town. The Germans were backed up into a corner. They fought these guys all night long. Then they stopped and surrendered.
Yes. So it wasn't like they were just like he was at a foxhole and just watching Germans surrender. They fought. And
Can you imagine?
No.
Can you imagine dying in the final hour of the war?
I know.
I'm sure guys did.
Every war.
That's horrible.
Unbelievable. So for people who don't know, because we didn't say it early on, but now we can, he has the combat infantryman badge, which is really the thing that frontline soldiers are most proud of. That means he spent time in combat in a zone and he had to fire his gun at the enemy and they were firing back at him. Also a Purple Heart, and then a Bronze Star for Valor for the actions took place in northern Italy that we just described right there, which is pretty amazing.
Cool.
Okay, so the war is over, but he's going to talk a bit more about where the unit would go, a little bit about Mussolini. We've got a few more really cool clips coming up, so go ahead and play the next one, Ryan.
Well, they just kept sending you north because at that time, Yugoslavia, I guess of them, wasn't they acting up under Tito or
Mhm.
What
Yes,
was
they
the
did.
guy's name?
Yeah, like a communist slash nationalist
Yeah,
revolution.
and then they had a couple of 3 divisions up there, sent north, and I was north when I got to come home, and they had a rest area that you could go to, and if your name came up on the board, you would check in, and then so they got the load, the ship full that they were going to bring back home. And I remember there's a lot of us that said, "Now, what if we're on leave on and up there in the rest camp, and our name comes up? Don't worry about it. We'll come get you." I do remember I had to
Better.
cover.
Yeah, can you imagine how pissed off you'd be
Oh
if
my
you're.
gosh. You mean I missed it? What?
I know. I've been waiting around for days to hear my name called. I go out for 5 minutes, have a cigarette, and you call my name, and I'm gone. This is just a bunch of crap. But that's what it was. The Yugoslavian thing, I did some research on that, and yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, the Balkans are the whole word Balkanized means separate, distinct pieces. In Sarajevo, Bosnia, Montenegro, all those countries that exist now became Yugoslavia after the war under the communist dictator Tito. And our role was to prevent that from coming into Italy, from preventing those communist forces, because there were Italian communists in Yugoslavia, from going into Italy. Our goal was to maintain a democratic presence in all the areas that we could. And most of the Balkans ended up going communist anyways. Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia. I think Greece was the lone holdout. Even Albania went into the communist camp. So that was that.
Tito's partisans actually were fighting over in that region, as guerrillas essentially against the German army. And some of our flyers that were shot down were rescued by Tito's partisans and shepherded back to Allied lines.
And that's what makes it so complicated, because when the war was going on, they were our allies. But then when the war ended and the Russians had occupied,
the calculus changes.
It changed completely. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, our new enemy are these communist regimes, and so we had to change our posture in that area.
Yep.
So at any rate, that's that. Now, I'm on this next clip. He's going to talk about a really infamous event that occurred when the war ended. What that event is, that infamous event, we'll have to wait until next week. We hope you enjoyed the 4th installment of the John Little series. You're going to want to listen in to next week, the final episode, installment number 5, where he talks quite a bit more about some of the memories from his time in the Italian campaign, what it was like coming home, and also some of the stuff he brought back with him from his time in the service that he still has today, that we had a chance to see when we did the Zoom interview. So join us next week so you can hear the final installment from this amazing series regarding an amazing man. Take care.